go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today. We are looking forward to this very exciting session. And in just a moment, I want to make sure that everyone knows that while you are more than welcome to go ahead and ask questions in the chat, there will also be a portion of our session that is specifically allocated at the end for question and answer. This is a dialogic space, and so we do hope that you will feel free to engage with these presenters. And we ask that you would please like and follow our social media handles so that you can engage with our global audiences as well that are also going to be liking, posting, and various things throughout this conference. So you can also comment on session flyers there as well. All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Hoeschmann. Dr. Michael Hoeschmann is a professor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University. He is the chair of the Media Education Research section of IAMCR, which is also known as International Association of Media and Communication Research. His recent books include multi-authored The Capitol Riots, Digital Media, Disinformation, and Democracy Under Attack, Education for Democracy 2.0, Changing Frames of Media Literacy, which is also co-edited, and don't miss picking up the Handbook of Media Education from Wiley. Okay, so thank you for being here, Michael. We're looking forward to this conversation. Additionally, I want to introduce Bhargavi Kumaran, who is a recent graduate who completed their degree in computer science at the Vellore Institute of Technology in Chennai, India. And her research interests are situated at the intersection of data science, as well as social justice and the social determinants of health. She was a I.P.E.S. Research Fellowship recipient at Lakehead University in the fall of 2022. And the title of this session is called Convoy and Convergence, Data Mapping the Anti-Vaxx Protest in Canada. And I will now turn it over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and for that lovely introduction, but I see that the host disabled participant screen sharing. I thought I was going to just click a button and everything would change.
Okay. So let's go ahead and make sure that you can share.
But while we're doing that, then I'm just going to thank the conference organizers. It is exciting to participate from the north tip of the Americas with a conference that is at the very southern tip of the Americas, and to do that also in collaboration with somebody in a totally different time zone on the other side of the earth, which is Bhargavi Kumaran. Bhargavi and I are having the unusual and first opportunity to present this material together, because I've presented it a couple of times in in-person conferences that Bhargavi has not been able to attend because of distance and cost. So when we saw the opportunity to work together here, we took it. And honestly, you know, I think one time Bhargavi was listening in on, you know, I had the phone on at one of these conferences. So she's heard me present to an audience, but I haven't heard her. So I'll be looking forward to that today. I will begin things today, and then she'll step in at the point when we get to the research that she led. Let's see how my slides are doing here. There we go. For some reason, the title's not coming in. So yes, this is part of a bigger project on conspiracy theories, and so it's funny how it fits or doesn't fit into critical media literacy. Like to some extent, this is you know, it's background material, but it does speak to the problem of actually doing education if in fact we live in increasingly divided societies where people come into situations with their minds made up, and even the sense that you are proselytizing and trying to you know, perhaps lie but manipulate. And so there's a current struggle over the word critical, and critical thinking. So here we are at the Critical Media Literacy Conference, but there's many people who would say that we are actually sheeple, who are simply following in line. We're part of the woke world, and we are simply not thinking critically. So we're using the word critical very ironically here. By the way, I'm just remembering my thank yous. I was also going to mention Andrea Gambino for orchestrating the event this morning and for getting up early, etc. But yeah, so that's one of the problems then. And what's happened since we did this research is Naomi Klein finished another book, Doppelganger, and I finished Doppelganger. So I come to you having read that book, and Naomi Klein's, one of Canada's contributions to sort of critical discourse around the world, and she's done it again with a book looking at what she calls the mirror world. So what I was talking, referring to as conspiracy theories and the people that hold those, Naomi's call it, saying that there's this other reality, and so that there's one, sort of world in which, she suggests she exists, and then another one which is the mirror world. And the funny thing about the word conspiracy is something that I never have. It's only you that have it, right? Like it's an accusation. It's not a point of identification. So Naomi's trying to break free of that as well, and trying to get into this place of understanding how and why people take on the ideas that they do. And one of the key points that she makes is she says they get the facts wrong, but the feeling's right. And so, that something's not quite right. And it is interesting to spend some time in this world, and this idea of the awake and the fifth consciousness, and just to recognize all of the truth and half-truth that lingers in that space. And so one of the great conspiratorial, I think it's been at the heart of most of my thinking over the last 30 years. And I came into university as a student of Latin American studies, and I know about, so much about, what happened in Argentina, what happened in Chile, what happened in different parts of Latin America. And clearly, global forces were at play, financial, governmental, military, operatives, were in place. So, and these are not part of the common discourse in North America. But the idea too that neoliberal capitalism has always been something of back rooms and handshakes and non-disclosure agreements, right? So big decisions are taken, and they have immediate ramifications. One of the things we see right now is inflation in North America, and people, total bewilderment at no longer being able to afford housing, or even, milk and eggs at the store. And there was a whole wave of trade deals, especially in North America, the free trade agreement, I think it was 1989. So we already have this for about 30 years. And many of the global trade agreements were involved creating mechanisms that would be outside of the view of the media. So that there'd be these courts where decisions would be made, and there'd be non-disclosure agreements. So basically, a conspiracy world was created, like something else was created, a second chamber where major decisions would take place that we would not be able to see. Like here in Canada, there was the sale of a pipeline that occurred 5-10 years ago. The Canadian government bought a pipeline from Kinder Morgan, from a Texas company, and they paid several $billion, and all the Canadians were like, why are you spending this? This is an old pipeline. Why are you doing this? But many of us also felt that it had something to do with some of these trade agreements that had been signed previously. We have one with China. Canada does, that was signed in 2015, and it won't come due till 2045. And whatever happens in those back rooms, we have no idea. And so the idea that we live in a world where there's these forces that are at play that we don't really see is not at all implausible. And so when folks start pointing at one of them is big pharma, right? Pharmaceuticals and the vaccines during COVID, and this is where we're sort of heading here. But another one is surveillance capitalism. They start saying, well, wait a minute, something's going on. There's a joke. Naomi Klein reports this, that there's a joke that the left will say, well, have you heard of a smartphone? Ha ha ha. Like, of course, there's surveillance capitalism. It's already happening. It's in your pocket, right? But meanwhile, there's these conspiracies about digital currency and digital ID, and people are getting really concerned about this. And these two are part of what we'll be talking about today. The last sort of point of entry is that one of my fascinations growing up on the west coast of the Americas in those sort of hippie worlds is how New Age thinkers have been drawn in. And this is, again, another piece that also fascinates Naomi Klein and Doppelganger, because her doppelganger is Naomi Wolf, who was the author of The Beauty Myth, who now is a regular participant in a podcast called The War Room, which is run by Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon was the operative behind Donald Trump, right? And Naomi Klein says Steve Bannon is looking very carefully at the left, and he has a one-way glass. He looks at what's going on, and he looks at what's being missed, and where there's gaps, and he tries to draw attention to those and capture those as part of his alt-right agenda. So this mirror world is actually also talking about something no longer just mystical and out there, and but rather something deliberate, which is an alt-right focus on changing people's minds and drawing them more towards right-wing perspectives. And really, ultimately, Naomi Klein says that for Donald Trump to be reelected in the United States, they need white women to vote Republican. And she says that people like Naomi Wolf help legitimate the alt-right, because the alt-right says, look, we're beyond ideology. This is not ideology. Left and right is all dead, So anyway, that's some of the background that fuels this. And I'm aware that we have more time than a typical conference, so I'm indulging a little bit. We're kind of an intimate gathering here. There doesn't seem to be that many of us here, although I do notice that the Gambino family is well represented, and I'm pleased for that. But anyway, so Bhargavi, we'll get to you eventually here. Sorry, I didn't even realize that I could press a button and the rest of this title would come out. But so in Canada, in the winter of 22, there was this occupation of the main city, Ottawa, and it came about at a time there's a sort of a convergence of different elements of Canadian society that came together there, and some of it was a right wing which had been present and had been seeking this type of opportunity for several years. Like there'd been previous convoys. This wasn't the first convoy, but this was one that captured the imagination, because as it came when a population was weary of COVID mandates and sort of looking to point fingers, and so here there was this gathering, and the gathering was very complicated. Now, one of the things I'd like to stress is that there's a media component to this, but it's not the only component. And so to some extent, to say, let's separate out media from conspiracy. And conspiracy, as conspiracies are almost part of the human condition, right? Like that I referred to some of the background of conspiracy over the last 30 or 40 years, but conspiracies are part of oral narrative, and they do precede the internet. They do precede 20th century media. They do precede the John F. Kennedy assassination, etc. Like this is old stuff. And then populism, that there's an actual forces in play right now trying to really anti-democracy movements that want to get power. So that these three are distinct. And so again, I started us off with Naomi Klein, but I want to get into this a little bit. So the doppelganger is the second self, right? And she has Naomi Wolf to discuss, and people do confuse them in public. But very interestingly, she also talks about some things that we discuss in academia, and the idea that there's a data self that's been made of Michael Hoeschmann. Like Michael Hoeschmann, I exist actually in many more than one form, but let's just say the data world, out of clothing choices or food choices or television programming choices, has a version of me, right? They have a version of me, and I don't agree with that version, but that version, you know what I'm talking about. There's a data, there's enough, like a datification of you, and so that's another self of yours. And then you create one, and this is the one we're talking about, the idealized self. So the one that I create on, in social media, always smiling, never unhappy, showing triumphs, never never the other things. So there's at least 3 of me in play. Then she gets into things like your soul, and I mean the book goes all over the place. But we're not just these singular selves. But then the idea that this is in play at a social level, and the idea of a mirror world, that this mirror world is actually my other, and that mirror world, that if I don't take the time to try to understand that mirror world, then I'm doing a disservice to myself and to the society at large. So in other words, we need to find those kernels of truth in the conspiracy world and honor them and deal with them. And I think this book does a terrific job of that. The other thing is Shadowlands is another other, and Shadowlands is the zones of disposability, the precarious selves, it's the migrant crisis at the US border, it's the coltan mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's the recycling of first world gadgets in China and elsewhere. So we have these multiple worlds at play as well. And I'm not even talking today about the worlds at war, etc. But there's a whole series of this society has sort of splinter cells, right? And then she talks too about how the expectations others put upon us. So a racialized self, how that a person can be attributes are ascribed, assumed, a stereotyped self, a gendered self, etc. Right? And I went to this talk in Toronto, which I have a picture of here, and Jesse Wente is an Indigenous journalist in Canada. He was the interviewer, and he said, look, we've been living with this mirror world ever since you guys showed up, right? Like basically this idea that there's another version of, we'll take the same objective details and we'll just tell a whole story about it, right? And that's what has been happening. Now, if I'm having trouble right now advancing, okay. So here's some of the conspiracy theories at play right now. The Great Reset is the sort of the myth. It's the one in the middle. That's where Davos and this fellow Klaus Schwab play a role. By 2030, they wish to divest of us of any of our worldly possessions, put us into indentured labor, keep us in open air prisons, which we're calling 15-minute cities. I mean, this is all very well developed. We will our money will be digital. Eventually, we'll probably have tracking devices inside our skin. In fact, those vaccines might have been pushing those in, etc. Right? So, but alongside it's the Great Replacement. We can't really talk about all this today, but it's a racialized story, that one, and the QAnon is in the background, and etc. So there's a whole number of those, and what I'm doing now is thinking about, well, first of all, there's this quote here saying, in the wokey world, information is disinformation and disinformation is information. So one side is saying everything you say is disinformation, and the other side is saying it as well. It's happening, right? And I'm referring here to these circles are clusters that one sets off the other. So imagine like hitting a drum, and so the reverberations we heard across the other drums. And so critical race theory, if you start talking about it, then you're probably beholden to Klaus Schwab and what's happening at the World Economic Forum, vaccine mandates for sure. These characters, even Hollywood's in there because of QAnon. So this is more than we can discuss today. But we'll start with the Great Reset. We'll keep the Great Reset in mind because the Great Reset is central to Ottawa. Ida Alkin over here is the author of this quote, which gets lots of play in conspiracy theories. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Okay, so, and she's a Danish member of parliament, and she was talking about circular economy. So it's like people in a particular neighborhood, maybe sharing garden tools or what have you. You know, it's a circular economy. We know that there's a mercantilized sharing economy called Uber and Airbnb, but she says, you know, we might, and this will impact, this will improve or slow down the climate emergency, and maybe we'll be happier at the same time. And the picture in the bottom left is Klaus Schwab talking to now the King of England, who was one of the people, one of the early people to speak highly of, you know, some of these ideas. And so this is the great conspiracy that's happening. And there's something about that picture, that young man, that picture was apparently on the World Economic Forum website briefly, like only for a few days, and it was taken down. And that's seen as a sign that they didn't really want anybody to really latch onto this. But there's something about his multi-ethnic self that, you know, it makes me very suspicious, right? That there's a crossover here from the Great Reset to the Great Replacement. And we get a lot of play into pop culture. So we use the narrative effects of pop culture. So Klaus Schwab in the top left compared to Dr. Evil in Austin Powers. Same on the left there. And this idea of eating bugs. I was in Mexico and I brought home a bag of grasshoppers. I even have them here. If I could offer you, I would. But you know, here in Canada, there was a company in London, Ontario, decided to try to produce protein from insects, and they, you know, were criticized heavily and kind of threatened as well, because somehow or other experimenting with those types of products means that you're most likely one of this global elite, right? And that global elite there in the bottom right, you see Bill Gates, George Soros, Anthony Fauci, and in our country, Pierre Trudeau is very much put there. And and suddenly the pandemic was this opportunity to do a reset. And you know, their reset is actually what I would call kinder, gentler capitalism. Schwab says, I want to move us from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And the stakeholders include workers, and they include in physical environments. So, you know, he's saying, let's keep this game going. We're not going to make fundamental change, but we're going to change some of the conditions to keep it more sustainable. It's sustainable capitalism is what they want. And the conspiracists have linked it up to the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. So suddenly the sustainable development goals have been politicized. And this is very, you know, sad, I would say. At the bottom, there's a sign I threw in from one of these memes, you know, the climate lockdown is a form of socialism and the Great Reset, right? And then, as I said, I've been interested in how this gets softened. And in the top right, there's a women's rally. There's a man behind, but still, it was, you know, women participating in an anti-Great Reset rally. But these fellows, Russell Brand, who has since got into a whole other, you know, stepped into something else, a Me Too type thing, but also J.P. Sears down here. I mean, these people, they make great fun of the Great Reset. They're making money on it. Actually, it's really who they are now. So we're going to switch gears now into Ottawa. So we have this gathering, and in Naomi Klein's book, she points out that when 215, the residuals of 215 children under a residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia, was found in June 2021. This had a dramatic effect on Canada. So Canada was having a real major reckoning with its the history of oppression of Indigenous people. And in 2021, Canada Day was canceled in some cities. So the festivities on July 1st were canceled. And already now, 6 months later, this big event happened, and the event, the ultimate icon and symbol was the Canadian flag. So the Canadian flag came back in a really big way. So there's some form of frustration, and Naomi Klein points out how interesting it is that there had been a truck rally for those 215 children in Kamloops, and she said that some of the same truckers participated in both convoys, and she said that's very interesting, and we have to take that seriously. We have to look at that. We have to understand. We have to examine. We have to somehow honor that, to say, well, wait a minute. One moment you're standing in solidarity with Indigenous people, and another one you're rallying with the Canadian flag to take down the Canadian government because you're concerned about the vaccine mandate. Anyway, there was definitely a popular component. It was not just simply a right-wing rally. There was elements that were taking great advantage, but this image on the bottom left here is very indicative of what we were seeing in Canada, which was people across the country sort of coming out to enjoy the event and to sort of celebrate it. Then we saw, these were the things that were heavily reported in the media, the icons of the far right, including that one image with the swastika, but a number of others, like in the top right here, this diagolon, that red line one, it's a sort of right-wing group that was highly present, and the F. Trudeau logo. We talk about a sort of a daytime and nighttime of this protest, so there was a celebratory side to it, and I did, I had a graduate student that was in Ottawa, and he said that you could feel the difference, like literally feel the difference between day and night. So people on weekends turned this into a bit of a party. And that became a real legitimating side to it. People were saying, like, how could this be about hate? Look at it. It's all about love. And again, some of the people in the country. Now, I know I've kind of indulged myself at the starting point of this presentation, so we're probably running a little bit short on time. We've got to get to Bhargavi soon, but here, we see, well, Justin Trudeau, who was on the chair at the World Economic Forum, and this woman standing in front of some graffiti at the Convoy site is standing in front of a sign that says, the Great Resist, but instead of the Great Reset. There's also a sign there for Canada's far-right political party, the fellow there at the bottom, right next to Trudeau, Maxime Bernier. And this, I'm just going to show you these because these are really interesting. There's a whole bunch. There was a lot of, let's call it, meme warfare going on at the time, and this becomes part of the way that people are persuaded. And I think that memes, I think we rushed through them a little bit in media literacy. I think they were kind of a phenomena, and then we're missing the fact that actually memes are one of the central ways that that ideas circulate in our societies. And these ones were certainly positioning Justin Trudeau in a particular way, and then they got really creative. And some of them were by the same person here, this George Hampton, but Superman, that's the leader of the Conservative Party who might become the next prime minister. And the fellow in the Walmart greeter, he was the leader of the opposition of that party at the time. So, and they're very effective, and so are these ones now about Trudeau and his comparison to all the world dictators. So we, as I said, there's this interest in what's happening from the New Age side, and that whole idea of do your own research, which is very much an internet age concept. Get out there, and the algorithm will show you where to go. But that red pilling and becoming awake, because that's what people claim, that we're awake, is a lot like the left's concept of conscientization. It's like aha moment, right? And we should be wary of that. This was about QAnon, and I don't want to suggest that Ottawa ever led to violent extremist acts, but this is this idea of pre-radicalization and exposure being something of repetition and conversation, leading to this group bonding. Like those elements were absolutely in play. And I think maybe January 6th, you might have got to the fourth stage there, the justifying, moralizing, but maybe I just, we have to be careful how we deploy something like that. So then what we did was we undertook a study of some of the data and some of what was being said by the members of the convoy. Bhargavi, do you want to take over for a while? Well, and you can tell me when to switch slides, though I have the slides.
Got it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not being able to turn my video on. We're having a lot of rains here in Chennai, and it's really hampered my Wi-Fi connection. If I attempt to turn my video on, it outs me from the call.
Okay.
Not a worry.
But yes, I do apologize, and thank you to the organizers for having me. I'm very excited to present this with Professor Michael for the first time. Professor, could you navigate to the slide with the maps?
Oh, we're gonna go right along?
Yes, I will.
Or that one?
No, the big map. Yes, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the goal here, what we started with was to create a map of the anti-vaxx movement within the context of the trucker convoy, right? So it was essentially to create a map of sentiment, not geography or time. So I'm not sure if you can zoom in, but if you can see that there are boxes that have a green border, and there are boxes that have a red border. So it's the map is essentially to illustrate that you can start in a seemingly innocuous mindset, right? Something like natural immunity is good, or just have like bias towards natural medicine, and just through the well, we worked with tweets, so I'm going to say just through Twitter, you could suddenly find yourself in the middle of a conspiracy theory and completely opposed to any other viewpoint. So what we're attempting to do here is trying to create a map to radicalization, where you could start somewhere very innocent and end up in the middle of the Great Reset, essentially. So in order to do this, our first step was to build a database of tweets. For this, we've only used Twitter because this was before the takeover of Twitter. So it was a gold mine of textual data. So the first step was to use a scraper, which is essentially a tool that we use to get information of a certain website. Twitter made it, I'm not sure what the situation is like right now, but back then Twitter made it really easy for us. They had researcher credentials that allowed us to scrape a lot of tweets, more than normal people would. And we were able to filter tweets through location and time as well. So we were able to really zero in on our target population. So how this started was we used a set of 5 seed hashtags, I want to call them. Vax, sheeple, vax with 2 X's, unvaccinated, and no vax. These hashtags, I came up with them because they seemed really obvious, and that's where we started. On collecting tweets, I use really primitive natural language processing tools like tokenization and frequency analysis to find words that were repeated in a lot of the tweets. So words like shedding, words like vaccine injury, they came up a lot in these tweets, and that's how we made this set of hashtags. These are all seed hashtags. So what it does is the scraper essentially uses this list of hashtags to find more tweets, and that's how the database was built. The next step was to annotate these tweets into categories that we could actually use to make a map. So there's a lot of categories here. If you can see, they're all sentiments. Like even to be even more clearer, I would say that the sentiment that the tweet is trying to express or trying to invoke in the reader. So outrage, for example, would say something like, I think this tweet comes up later in the slides, but it would say something like, this is genocide, or it would equate vaccine mandates to the Holocaust or to racism, essentially. And another example would be pseudo, which would be tweets that are peddling something, like a remedy, or scientific papers that aren't really peer reviewed. And these sentiments were essentially what they were trying to espouse. We have a set of 21 sentiments here. All of them. Uh, Professor, could you navigate to the slide with the triangles? Here we can see how all of these sentiments overlap. So, ego is essentially uh, one of the tweet authors thinking they cannot be wrong. So, it would be something like, I'm better than you because I did not get the vaccine. And you can see how it overlaps with anecdote, where they would be where it could be something like, I didn't get the vaccine and I'm fine, or someone I know got the vaccine and they're not fine, which overlaps with pseudoscience because that's really not science, is it? And you can see that that it overlaps with nature and cash grab and so on. So this is I mean, I guess this is technically another map which I made to show the overlap of sentiments, so we could really figure out where these people were starting and ending from.
And the word
Ending
movement, movement, Bhargavi, that means this gathering, or?
Okay, so the word movement here means mobilization, or trying
Yeah,
to mobilize an anti-vax community, essentially.
yeah.
Something
Okay.
like we should all stand up or they will, get rid of us.
Nice.
If you could go, yes. Here I've pointed out a few tweets that sort of happen at the intersection of one or more categories. So the first one says natural immunity is best. I am a trucker. I have not taken a single dose of this vaccine, still have not got sick. So you can see that there is pseudoscience here. This is an anecdote, and there is also ego at play here, right? That I'm better than you because I can see through the vaccine propaganda. And the second one also is in the middle of it's in the intersection of medical mistrust, which is a real problem. But here in this particular scenario, that mistrust is being used to further radicalize people. Here it says doctors cannot answer questions about natural immunity because they make decisions based on CDC guidelines. And the hashtag list that was in the earlier slides, it doesn't just contain hashtag. They also contain like events and people. So if let's say Elon Musk, if he keeps coming up again and again, he would also be included in the search, and we'd get tweets based on that as well. So most notably, we had one footballer who had a heart attack that was attributed to vaccine injury. Just to give you an example, so his name was also in one of my search terms. It's not pictured here. I'm just giving you a
Yeah.
better view of the entire. Professor, can we go back to the yes? Okay. This is something I made uh, to sort of show the pro anti-vax. If you look at it over here, I'm actually pro-vaccine, but I don't think schools should have the power to force kids into getting a vaccine. So this is someone who is pro-vaccination, but they're starting to doubt that like the you cannot force someone is a gateway, and you can see that they're starting to read into that narrative. And towards the end, there's someone who says, I've got natural immunity, but you're happy with your choice and I'm elated with mine. This is another gateway, which is essentially, this is all personal choice, and this is all personal choice, and no one should be infringing on that right. Similarly, there's also homeopathy and medical medium therapies. On the other side of this, on the red side, you can see that these people start off very radicalized. These are either really political people or really religious people, right? So you can see that there's already some conspiracy theories at play here. New depopulation plan was in action the moment they released the virus. The vaccine deception is connected to the mark of the beast from revelations in the Bible. These people are either really religious or really political. And over here, we have two tweets that sort of illustrate the passage from the left to the right. Not politically, just in the context of this slide. There is something to be said about natural immunity. This is also another gateway where people acknowledge natural immunity, which is fine, but they also sort of start leaning towards the concept that natural immunity is better than whatever a vaccine can give you.
Well, I'm just moving us through to, well, there was this is sort of
Yes.
the easy, like it's the less cluttered version of the same thing. It's proximity, Bhargavi. There's a piece there about, what's close to what.
Okay, so this is actually based on the data set itself. The size of the uh, sticky note is directly proportional to the number of tweets that sort of reference it. And we see here that politics, racism, and curfew are all really related, which means these themes happened in the same tweets. Like a lot of tweets that were political were also racist. But again, it is proportional to the amount of tweet, which is why those are smaller. And revolution, for example, is really big. Um, yes, and I've sort of centered the sticky notes around these three themes, these three points of no return. So you can see that tweets that have big pharma also have like the normies would get it sentiment and the we are being persecuted sentiment. And tweets that have they are lying are also really closely linked with politics, conspiracy, revolution, and surveillance. And you can also see that there's there's a relation between religion, freedom, and choice, for example, as well as medical mistrust, homeopathy, and natural immunity. So the proximity of one sticky note to another is the sort of overlap between the tweets of that sentiment and the other sentiment, and the size is the number of tweets that contain the sentiment.
Well, is there anything more, Bhargavi?
No, I think that does conclude my portion of the presentation.
Well, we'll get to a question period really soon. I just want to move us to closure here. And this was a picture from, it was a screen grab I did. I think it's from the Atlantic magazine. But this idea now that protest itself is being co-opted by the right. So protest was something that was seen as a left type of manifestation, has now become very central to identities of the right. And I think Steve Bannon's study of the left and trying to do the cultural revolution, like this, it's not just him, but people under the DeSantis government in Florida, they're talking about replicating some of what the left has been doing, the long march, and they use Antonio Gramsci's concepts, etc. But this idea that everything big is now a target, big pharma, big media, the MSM, like after Ottawa. In fact, today, right now, there's this issue in Canada, and people are saying, I don't trust the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Why? Because it started during the trucker convoy. And so anyway, this is another cluster. And then one of the final exit points here is this idea that that the police were very soft with what happened in Ottawa until they weren't. When they did finally clear it out, and this was a big issue on the right. When the police came in, they said, "Wow, they're being heavy-handed." But we have other incidents in Canada. There's a pipeline going through Indigenous country in out west, and also there's a series of protests around the clear cutting. That clear cutting means taking down the trees, the last forests in British Columbia. So And the RCMP has been very violent, very, very violent in those settings. And they've actually determined that there's a special group within the RCMP. Anyway, people are treated differently. And now just my one, this is an exit on the way out, just to mention something in the media literacy vein and younger people. In Canada, the organization Media Smarts, the Canada Center for Digital and Media Literacy, conducts research as well as being a resource site. And there was some research on algorithms and the awareness on the part of young people, and they did it through games and getting people a little bit more aware of how algorithms work. But I just wanted to, won't get into it too much other than to say you should maybe check it out. But just to look at these verbs that I've, that I bolded, these young people, after studying algorithms a bit, they say they're concerned, they're frustrated, they're aware, they're skeptical, and that this is weird, scary, unsettling, worrying, concerning, and creepy. And I want to just point back to the role of media in these protests and these conspiracies, and this idea of do your own research. Because do your own research means go there, type something in, and then let the algorithm take over. So this, algorithms do have a role to play here. And the youth said we need greater awareness, we need transparency, we need protection, we need control over data, and we need some involvement in decisions. So this is where it all ends, with Trudeau in jail, thanks to the meme artist, and we appreciate your attention today. And I do want to say, Bhargavi, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed your comments, and the stuff about ego, I hadn't picked up on that. I hadn't picked up on that at all. But ego comes both ways. It comes back to us, to haunt us when we use the word conspiracy.
All right. Well, thank you all for that riveting session. We're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. So we're wondering, feel free, if anyone has a question in the chat, if you'd prefer to use the chat feature, please feel free to type to our panelists. Otherwise, if you have a question orally, please do feel free to unmute your mic. Does anyone have a question? I would also like to say that this presentation was riveting. I'm very passionate about the work that you both are doing, and I follow your work very closely. And so I can't think of a more important time that we're deeply analyzing all of these things that are going on in regards to conspiracies. And I was struck in particular about the way that you're representing your data, both of you, and the types of stories that this data can tell differently than when we're unpacking what we're seeing and trying to make sense of dis and misinformation. Oh, I see we have a question here from Vivek. How do you think artificially generated content with artificial intelligence models might affect the information landscape, especially with respect to conspiracies?
You want to take that on, Bhargavi?
Yes. Okay. So I feel there are two sides to this, right? On one hand, I've worked very closely with people who are very knowledgeable about, generative AI. And I think in terms of content generation, we still have a long way to go to resemble anything close to what a human content writer would be capable of. But on the other hand, we can already see propaganda being spread using generative AI tools. And I think it could go either way. I think there needs to be legislation governing this, but I think in the upcoming years, we will be seeing a lot more, propaganda, so to speak, generated using AI. And I also think due to the very early, since we're in the very early stages of content generation, I do think it will be really identifiable as well. So yeah, two sides.
And as well, we're living with algorithms, and they are forms of artificial intelligence. So in fact, the impact of artificial intelligence is embedded in do your own research. It's right here, it's right now. And then back to Naomi Klein, she's talking about how artificial intelligence is entirely being generated upon the whole data set, like that. Right now, everything we've said on the internet and everything we've produced that's been digitized is now part of artificial intelligence. So there's that as well. That whatever's in the water is circulating over and over, and so the potential for misunderstandings, etc., is very high. And I guess I also want to go to a book. It's by an American author. Oh Lord, I can't find it. But who's talking about the new right and the media, and how people are well, to sort of subvert regulation. People are changing words and doing, or add an image to something, which has nothing to do with it, and there's a sort of a new right subversion happening in YouTube, sometimes in like food programs. Also, Amazon here in Canada, it's been pointed out by some of our greatest data analysts that Amazon is actually the site of the greatest number of falsehoods. That Amazon, because it's a book collection, you can put your pamphlet up there, and before long, you get inside that Amazon algorithm, and you're suddenly being fed to the wolves. So a lot of this is happening already, but we appreciate the question, and I liked Bhargavi's answer.
Please. Free, Bhargavi. If anyone has or anything else on that. Did you want to add on more? Or?
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, if I could just add on tiny bit more.
Yeah, please.
All right. I just wanted to bring up that content generation models in particular, right? AI models, they cannot create meaning. So they cannot create theories out of thin air. They would still need humans to, come up with the theories. They just generate content when you give them as in they cannot create meaning. They just use words that are normally most used together, and they present it in a cohesive manner. So I do think that if AI tools were to be used to, generate propaganda, it would make content moderation a little bit more easier, since there would be a lot of logical loopholes, this being an AI algorithm, sorry.
Thank you. Yes, much to reflect on here. And so we also have some more questions too. So let's see if we can cover these. Let's see. Santiago, did you want to ask? Or you want me to read?
Bueno, yo la puedo decir en español, tal vez la tengan que traducir.
It's okay. And Michael, would you be comfortable with that to translate? Okay.
No problem.
Okay. No, la pregunta era si pudieron en su investigación contrastar estos datos en otros países, tal vez en otros continentes o demás, teniendo en cuenta que analizaron en el caso de Canadá, por lo que entendí, teniendo en cuenta que estos movimientos antivacunas y también estas teorías conspirativas están generalizadas en el mundo, ¿no? Sobre todo creo en el mundo occidental o occidentalizado, no sé si en otros lados. Entonces esa es un poco la pregunta.
Gracias. I'm just Santiago's also written it here in English, but basically the global context of some of these same conspiracy theories. And I'm going to say that it is work to be done on our part. I mean, here Fortress North America, we don't always look so carefully at the United States, but it's hard not to with conspiracies like QAnon and the Great Reset, etc. So it really has been looking at Canada, the United States. But I would suggest, I know that the anti-vaccination movement is much broader, and I think that this World Economic Forum piece has been accelerated by the internet. But I think the best answer to what you're saying is within the anti-hate speech movement, anti-odio, discursos de odio. And and I think that work is very international. And in fact, dehumanization is a very central element. Well, we can see this now in the Middle East conflict, but I've seen elements of that, coming from different African nations and from around the world, right? Like, but I mean, I'm not just saying that dehumanization is happening there, but I mean the analysis of dehumanization. If you look at UNESCO's work in Discursos de Odio and Hate Speech, you'll find a lot of this. And so I think conspiracy theory, especially with something like the Great Replacement, which is Eurabia in Europe, Eurabia, that this has a global presence, and there's research happening around the world. Did you have something on that, Bhargavi? Oh yeah, you had some interesting made in India conspiracy stuff you were telling me about.
Yes, actually, yeah, even from just like a data perspective, even our data has, like this anti-vax set of tweets in particular has tweets in Spanish, in other languages as well. We've had to filter out, so it definitely is global in this very narrow gap. But yes, speaking experience in India, I've seen and witnessed an increase in preferences, I would say, towards natural medicine, not because it's natural, but because of medical mistrust. And that really ties in a lot with anti-vax movements. And since the pandemic, really, there's been a rise in people seeing vaccines as threatening or as essentially as a move of the enemy, right? So yes, I would say it's global, at least in an Indian context.
I'm lucky I'm not the co-author of this Naomi Klein book, because I would be accused of publicizing it too much in this presentation. But she has a whole chapter on the autism myth in anti-vaccination movements, and it's a big focus. So that's another piece.
So, do you all have time for one more question? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. This is coming to us from Steve Gambino. I appreciate the taxonomy of terms in the flowchart that you presented. My perspective here is largely from a languages and linguistics context. Given that you have identified a number of terms and phrases that illustrate the spectrum of viewpoints, how would you advise further education to raise awareness about how information is distilled and managed in this space?
Bhargavi, do you want to take that first?
I do not think I have the experience to advise further education.
Yeah.
So I think you should go first.
Yeah, well, I mean,
but I do appreciate the question. Very nice.
No, when I saw it, I just thought, wow, we're coming out with a bang at the end, because it is a difficult question. And it's funny, my thinking hat is different when I'm the presenter than when I'm the audience. And I wonder, Steve, if you have a first take so that we could riff off it. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I was thinking that when you noted that Steve Bannon was paying very close attention to the left, and of course you've all heard the expression, that his philosophy is to flood the zone with, and I won't repeat the word. And I'm thinking that in a real sense here, we're in a situation where words are really being thrown all over the place, both right and left, and certain words start to people hear and start to just glaze over or turn aside because they recognize terms, right? Like even simple terms like critical race theory or critical media theory. Now the term critical has become sort of a term of engagement, of battle, if you will. I don't like to use militaristic terms, but if you get my point. So with all of these different words and terms that are out there, those of us who want to engage and show the disinformation for what it's worth with data science like you all have presented, how do we, where do we go from here? How do we manage that? Because just like language is always changing over time, slowly, but always over time. But in an information age that we're in, it's changing much faster. So now we have to adapt, right?
This is where at the very beginning I said we're in a tough place to do critical media literacy because we have people coming into our classrooms with their minds already made up, and so you're testing the limits of that. And one of the things Naomi Klein says is that we're ignoring the things that count: the economy, health, surveillance, and we are focused on what we're being accused of in this woke world. Around language and identity, and there's also this question of what unites the right and what divides the left is sort of like everybody just lets that happen. Let the right ignore things that will create arguments and so that they can unite themselves, and the left continues to divide itself on little points of language, etc. So I honestly think the answer is not really necessarily data science in this case. I think it's more human contact and communication, and I think it's empathy and analogic, not arguments, but cases and examples, like just sort of trying to wake people, I guess, but to awaken in them some sort of doubt. I mean, we have to reignite doubt in the mind of that person that comes into our classrooms with their minds made up, and we can sometimes do that by bringing them to something that they're not immediately reacting to. So we have to find those analogous examples and draw upon them. And I don't have the perfect example of that at this moment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I might add on just a little bit, while I was researching for another project I was working on, I came across this paper that presented a solution called inoculation against radicalization. So what they did was they tested on a data set of people who were shown a debunking of propaganda. And then they were shown propaganda, and they found that people were less likely to believe something or buy into something if they've already seen the debunking. So purely from content moderation, if they could use maybe even just, it could be just as simple as, making a set of keywords and sort of presenting, debunked claims ahead of these tweets. So people would be sensitized to what they're trying to do and and they would be less likely to fall for it. Yeah, this doesn't answer your question entirely. I thought it would be, it was pertinent.
That's excellent.
Yes.
Because I think even studying 1940s war propaganda, which, cartoons and comics.
Yes.
Interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
team.
you.
Well, we want to thank all of our guests as well as our interpreters, CMLCA community, and a special thank you to Michael Hoeschmann and Bhargavi Kumaran for this important conversation. So much to critically think and more deeply reflect about. I hope that we will consider these hearkenings as well to consider empathy and a return to the human story when we're trying to dialogue amidst an era of dis and misinformation and vast tension. And so I think that both Michael and Bhargavi have given us so much as we continue to think deeply on all of these things, especially relating to AI and its impacts on media and education and our worlds. All right, we hope that you'll join us for later sessions, and stay safe and be well. Enjoy your breakfast or lunch, depending on where you're joining us in the world. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all so much.
Gracias, Andrea. Gracias a los intérpretes.
Yes,
Y al
gracias,
público.
gracias.